So, welcome to my first podcast episode. It's called The Real Drive to Survive. With the research question, how can Formula One become more environmental friendly? So, I'm going to start off with a short introduction. Formula One is a global motorsport that generates significant economic and social benefits, but also has a substantial environmental impact. The sport has faced criticism for its high carbon footprint, resource consumption, and waste generation by FIA 2021. Several studies have documented the environmental impact of Formula One. A study by the FIA Institute for Sustainable Motorsport found that a single Formula One car can generate up to 650 kilograms of CO2 emissions per race. Another study by the European Parliament estimated that the sport's annual carbon footprint was around 256,000 tons of CO2 emissions. The European Parliament 2017. Over 45% of the total emission comes from its logistics, and over 28% from business travel. The sport's resource consumption is also a concern, with cars and equipment made of carbon fiber and material that requires significant amounts of energy and resources to produce. Zeverudi et al. 2018. There have been several efforts to reduce the carbon footprint. The sport has made significant efforts for reducing the footprint in recent years. The FIA has launched an initiative called the FIA Climate for Action, which aims to reduce the carbon emissions across the motorsport industry and become carbon neutral by 2030. The Formula One has also launched its own sustainability initiative, called F1 Green, which aims to reduce the sport's carbon footprint and increase resource efficiency. The initiative includes measures such as the use of hybrid engines, the adoption of sustainable fuels, and the promotion of recycling and waste reduction, as well as traveling with ultra efficiency and using only renewable energy of all offices, facilities, and factories. The adoption of sustainable practices in Formula One can bring several benefits, including economic, social, and environmental benefits. For example, the sustainable practice can reduce costs, improve efficiency, and promote innovation. They can also enhance the sport's reputation, attract new sponsors, and create new business opportunities. Additionally, sustainability can contribute to the development of sustainable infrastructure and promote sustainable tourism. Müller and Volker 2019. First, I'm going to introduce my guest, of course. Today I'm here with Ginny Mays. Ginny, if I'm correct, you are the Global Client Development Director at ERM, which stands for Environmental Resource Management. ERM is the world's largest and leading company when it comes to sustainability, and it's working with one of the world's leading companies from across the globe, like Shell, Unilever, and even for the United Nations Environment Program. Could you tell a bit more about the specific task you are fulfilling?
Yeah, so my role, thanks for having me, Dean. This is fun. My role is to help clients understand how they can meet some of these targets that they're establishing, because quite often companies come up with a target for net zero, and they make the commitment before they really understand what their current carbon footprint is. So we help them also make decisions about how to make that transition without foregoing some of the other sustainability development goals. So for example, sometimes clients are like mining and metals sector. They might say, we can become carbon neutral by X date, but they might use up all the water. We might have biodiversity issues if they don't do it the right way. So I work with clients to help them decide how to do that. I am not a technical expert on carbon or decarbonization, but I'm fairly savvy in the conversation when it comes to how we help people change their behaviors to meet those targets. And that's all about organizations, which I think is very relevant for your discussion.
Yeah, so I think, thank you. I think one of the first things, well, we're talking about the Formula One today, which is one of the, I would say, one of the leading motorsports competitions around the globe as well. So if you hear the words Formula One and sustainability, what are the first things that come to your mind?
Yeah, well, first thing is impact. So that's probably the first word that comes to mind. I think this, if we can figure this out, it will have a huge, massive impact. And the second thing is it's going to be a massive challenge. From my viewpoint, I think it's very typical that companies and organizations like this will make a target commitment and then try and figure out how they're going to do it, which they don't often consider their scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. They only look at their own operations, and that's not in line with the directives that are facing us with the Green Deal. So it's very interesting to have those conversations, but I think the Formula One industry, and my husband's a huge F1 fan, so, and I'm always talking about how are they going to green this up and still keep it interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really difficult task for them, especially because it's so difficult to measure like all the people coming towards the circuits, like there are ways of traveling. Yeah,
Yeah,
measuring the emissions on that one is going to be a really tough job, even if it's even possible.
you're
Um,
right.
yeah. So, like they recently in 2019, they started this zero road to zero emissions.
Mm-hmm.
After they faced some criticism by the FIA. The FIA is the Federation International Automobile. According to the European Parliament, the sport has had an annual emission of like 256,000 tons of CO2, which is massive, especially when you compare to like a regular car, which produces around 4.6 tons a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, some shocking numbers, I would say. They're now looking at the emissions, but yeah, that's only a little part of the sustainability, I would say. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because sustainability is more than only
Yeah.
the zero emissions.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. So if you think about, if we look at kind of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, which, as you mentioned, scope 3 is one of the hardest to measure. If you think about the tech sector, we all have phones. How we charge our phones and how we use our phones is scope 3 emissions. Scope 2 is all the parts that go into the phones, and scope 1 is the company that produces the design and makes the phones. So if you look at and apply that to Formula One, there's a huge exposure in scope 3. And I think Formula One as a whole, from what I've seen, very little snippets, is really looking to use offsetting to help change their carbon footprint. And the only way that you can do that is up to 5% of your total carbon. So that, with the kind of exposure you're saying, they're not going to be able to use offsetting in the way they would like. When it comes to sustainability, you also have the human impacts. If you look at how things are produced, where they're produced, the markets that are producing all the equipment that these drivers use, that's all part of the supply chain, which goes to also to scope 2 emissions. All the pieces of the car are not just built by the Formula One industry. It's all goes up the food chain. And then you look at things like travel and how they move these vehicles around the world for racing. That's also a huge, and the aviation industry hasn't figured it out yet. So Formula One is dependent on other partners to come up with green fuel solutions so that they can reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think the racing itself is only the smallest part of the emissions they're producing. It's like 40% is only of logistics, and
Yeah.
another 28% only by business traveling. That's only like the people who work for Formula One traveling around the globe for certain projects or new inventions or something like that. That's also
A part of
massive.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is worth looking at is, in the space that I work in, companies are under strict directives now through the EU Green Deal. If you look at the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and TCFD, which is the financial directive where the money's going, those directives are to make companies do the right thing. When it comes to FIA, my question is, who's holding them accountable? They're an organization, they're an association, it's big business, but there has to be oversight. Otherwise, you risk having them say a lot of really good things instead of doing the right things and using their influence to help change public behavior. Because the consumers are ultimately the one, if they see F1 bringing to light that this is real, this is not something that is going to be easily solved. We all have to come to the table and do our part. That's a huge role that they can play. And I think I mentioned to you that Vettel recently came out and, retired and said he was very concerned about the future of F1. Hamilton's also been a very positive influence. Whether or not you like him, that's a whole different subject. But the influence that they have over fans is very important to the mission that we all have. And then if you look conversely at something like football, soccer, some of the people taking it not seriously is not good for sport, and it's not good for the planet. So we need to find a way to bring those two together.
Yeah, because the Formula One has like a massive platform, of course, which they on working together to make, let's call it, being part of the same plan, like getting there together. Yeah, that's a really
especially
good point.
With young people. I think it's really important because your generation, even more than my generation, cares about this because your future is dependent on it in a way that mine isn't. And we've screwed it up. Our generations previously have screwed it up, but your generation is the one that's going to have to find the solutions. So the sooner that in the F1 industry partners with organizations that are doing the right thing, the better off everybody will be.
The social development goals, but do you think that's really like fitting into the conversation?
I think it's important to acknowledge, and F1 has a role to do that the sustainability development goals, the 17 of them, they are very critical to keeping balance as we go through this transformation. The planet has to change the way we do business, the way we live, the way we, every aspect of what we do. And if we don't do that, the countries that will be harmed are the third world countries. So there's a social performance element here where we're actually protecting people who can't do what they need to do. So for example, Africa, they don't have the means to make the commitments that the Netherlands does because they don't have they have a lot of poverty, a lot of lack of education. They don't have the visibility. So these things, yes, they can plant trees, they can do all these kind of initiatives, but we actually have to help reduce the carbon footprint for everyone, not just our own countries, not just our own Formula One sport. We have to help everybody rise all tides so we can lift the boat.
Yeah, because like they can like really show off with their zero emissions, but like at what other cost do the other social development goals are getting hurt by that? Like
exactly.
So as we said, it's going to be completely or really difficult to become sustainable. But would there be like another way they could become more sustainable, you think? Or what? Well, let's differ the question a bit.
It's a difficult one, but I think they need to start with knowing where they are. And I think they've done some materiality assessments, which is where they kind of measure what their carbon footprint is for scope 1. But it would be interesting to know what they've done for scope 2 and scope 3, because those are generally where the bigger, greater impact is. And influence their humanness in their organization can help influence a lot of the scope 3 people and their behaviors. So that needs to happen sooner rather than later. But I think the life cycle assessments need to be done on all the products that they use so that they know that, how they're made and how they're going to dispose of them. That whole cycle has to be looked at for everything. And that's a part of pulling together a really robust materiality assessment. And it's going to be different for every team. It's going to be different in every country. They need to have really robust partnerships to be able to do it. Companies like ours are really busy with all the big companies who are under massive pressure from governments to report correctly and do the right thing. And they're actually being driven by money because investors and asset fund managers are not investing in innovation unless it's green. So that's something for Formula One to think about.
So like if they, for instance, if they really want to try, and they come to your company, would you actually consider it, or would you say like, no, this is like a way too difficult case to present or to help? Like,
you know what, we would never, I can't say we would turn it down. We have kind of our core business, which is really helping business. And we have 50 years of doing that. We're the oldest company doing it. So we kind of stick to our sectors, which are oil and gas. We've been doing it for years with them. Mining and metals, the technology sector, which is a relatively new one, but really growing because semiconductors and all these other things, they need to figure out how they're dealing with that. And then we also work with the finance sector and power. Those are our really big, robust. We do some retail, we do some luxury brands, but in general, our core business is those because they are, if we get that right, that's a huge difference.
That's also a part of Formula One, of course. That
exactly. So think about this.
All the factories where things are being made, like those all combine
Shell's
into
a sponsor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these companies are also sponsors. So their money is getting put behind a business that is not green at the moment. Yeah. And they have to think about the impact of that on their reporting because they've got to do this CSRD reporting as of 2025. So is funding still going to be allowed by their investors if it's not green? So I think there's an incentive, a big incentive for FIA to get it right.
It's really from like the start of the whole chain to the end, like which is Formula One in this case. But yeah, you have to get it right through the whole thing, especially with the SBTIs you said. Because that's the new standard for right now, and that's how they're going to measure everything from now on. So eventually, Formula One also have to
adopt
and get the numbers right, and otherwise, well, yeah, I don't know what's otherwise going to happen, but probably not.
Well, that's my question for you because there are huge penalties under the Green Deal of not reporting for companies. So what about associations like F1? Who's the oversight for them? If they've got such a massive footprint, somebody's got to be holding them accountable.
So it's difficult, like who's gonna, because the Formula One is governed by the FIA, which is the Association for Motorsports, I would say. But who's gonna control or have a look at the FIA? Like it's
and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
That's gonna be a tough, or maybe eventually they're gonna put on the spot by the public. Maybe once the whole point of view from around the world has changed according to sustainability, are they gonna be held accountable by the public? That's maybe also another...
I think it's a fair point. I think they're unfortunately the climate change in some cultures, and I'm American, so this is very much the case in my home country. There's still a political agenda around climate change, and there are people that are still spouting to the public that it's fake news, it doesn't exist, and all this stuff. The reality is the science-based targets make it very clear what needs to happen, and it's based on science, it's based on data, it's based on fact. They, meaning the Formula One industry, could be instrumental in helping the public understand that, and that this is so important that we're taking it seriously, and this is the stand that we're going to take. But I mean, the young people are the ones where the change is going to come.
Advice would you give them that you already gave it? Like it's from really try to put it from start, like from the beginning where...
Okay, I'll say three things.
3 things, all right.
3 things, because that'll make it easier to digest. They need to know where they are. And that's for scope 1, 2, and 3. They need to have a really clear agenda for that. They need to partner with firms that are not in their industry. They need to partner with people that will see things and tell them the hard truth. And then they need to develop plans with those partners and stick to them. And then they need to use their influence to help change the behavior of everyone that follows F1, everybody in the business and everybody that watches it on TV.
I think that's a really nice way to end the conversation as well. A nice closing to the conversation, and I really want to thank you for helping me
you're welcome,
with the podcast,
Dean.
and
I'm glad
thank
you're
you for
doing
your
it.
time as well.
Important topic.
Yeah, I think we could talk about it for over hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, indeed.
Because it's such a wide topic, of course. All right, so to come to a conclusion, Formula One is a high-profile sport that has a significant environmental impact, but also has the potential to promote sustainability. The sport has made significant efforts to reduce its carbon footprint and promote sustainable practices, but further research is needed to evaluate the effectiveness of those efforts and identify new opportunities for improvement. A big step to look at for the future are the three scopes, so not only the sustainable measures they are taking as an organization, but also go for the extra step and think about the emissions all the fans who are visiting the events are creating. This will be a very difficult task to arrange, but definitely not impossible. If they really want to become more sustainable and environmentally friendly, they have to start from the beginning and core of the problem. They have to partner with the right people who are on the same level as they are and are willing to change. And then you also have to take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into consideration. They are much more than only reducing carbon emission. Lastly, Formula One can use their massive influence to create awareness around the environment and sustainability for everyone who is involved in the so-called product of Formula One. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Little side note, I spoke to Ginny, and she was at the time based in America, so that's why her audio might be a bit crackling at some points. Thank you and have a nice day.